And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today, we are talking about the center position for the Chicago Bulls, and we're talking about if Jalen Smith or Zac Collins can be a starter for the Chicago Bulls. We're also going to be talking about the direction in which the Chicago Bulls might take this upcoming season to address the center position. And so before we go ahead and jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Buzelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure you hit that subscribe, you hit that like button, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the content for today. And so look, this comes from an article that I saw here on Bleacher Nation. This is Elias Schuster that writes this, but one of the points in there is, start Jalen Smith or Zac Collins. And I thought that this was just really a terrific question. And I think it's one of the bigger things that the Chicago Bulls have to address in the offseason. And so, look, let's start with, what's going on around Vooch, because we know that Vooch has been really a steady professional in the NBA. I think that he's been steady for the most part with the Chicago Bulls. And yes, have we been disappointed with the defense? Absolutely. But you cannot deny the fact that Vooch is a walking double-double. And he really had a good year last year. He was at 18.5 points, so 18.5 points there. He had 10.1 rebounds a game. And he was terrific as far as shooting the basketball. He shot 53% from the field and 40.2 from three. So those were some, definitely some big jumps for him. And so Vooch still doing his thing at this point in time. But, the problem here is that Vooch just really doesn't fit the timeline for the Chicago Bulls and their build. And you're at a point now with him where he's on an expiring contract at $21 million. And so it's best served that you go ahead and you move on from Vooch. And, Vooch hasn't outright said that he wants to, walk away from the Chicago Bulls or he wants to be traded. In fact, at the end of the season in his press conference there for a couple players at the end of the season, when he came out and addressed the press, he said, look, I'm at a stage in my career where I'm trying to win now, playing the playoffs and hopefully a deep playoff runs and things like that. So we'll see. I believe that there are pieces that we can build upon. So talking about right now with the Chicago Bulls, it's a young team and it does take time, but it depends on what their timeline is and how they see this team. And so, that kind of really points to the fact of AK and really, that he's trying to get younger, and it would just be best served for AK to maximize this asset in Vooch, who has really come off a very good season as far as shooting the basketball. It's time for the Chicago Bulls to cash in here and see what they can do. And so we'll see what, AK is going to do. He did say at the end of the trade deadline that they had set some groundwork. One would assume that, a deal would be coming for Vooch, but I think that clearly the Chicago Bulls would need to pivot on from him. And if they do, could Jalen Smith or could Zac Collins start? Absolutely. I think that both things can be true at once. I think both of those players can be a starter. And let's start with Jalen Smith and really why I think he can be a starter and some of the things that we would be concerned about if he is a starter. And so, with Jalen Smith, you didn't see a whole bunch as far as the production is concerned, as far as like the minutes played and then also to the points and things like that. But I think with Jalen Smith, you saw some flashes. And I think that for him, if you look at his per 48, I think you see a player that really makes you wonder, like, man, if you get him some more minutes, could he really take off? And I feel like that he didn't necessarily get a chance to show that. And I think that there were a couple of situations that played into that. One, he was injured. Two, somehow he got played out of the rotation. I don't know how that happens. And I think that that's more so on Billy Donovan needing to put him in there and needing to trust a situation where you actually play two bigs at the same time, meaning it either needed to be Vooch and Jalen Smith or it needed to be Zac Collins and Jalen Smith. And I think that that's something that Billy Donovan is going to have to address this season or for this next season, especially if the Bulls do draft a player. But, not to jump too far ahead, but with Jalen Smith, you see the numbers, you see that the 8.2 points, and he had a little bit of a decline there. So 9.9 the season before. You see the rebounds slightly down, and you see the free throw percentage down as well, which was huge. We talked about that with his season grade. But more importantly, let's look at just the game started And you see that he had more opportunities with the Pacers. You see that the production was a little bit better. You see what happened with the Bulls. And so he needs to get more minutes, and that comes down to trust. So Billy Donovan would have to trust him. And then next, when it comes down to just what he presents to the Bulls that you like about him is I think he's the more fluent three-point shooter, in my opinion, between Zac Collins and him. I think that he definitely has a shot that it looks smoother. It's something that definitely fits a little bit more as to what the Chicago Bulls want to do with the playing style. I think between if you're looking at the athleticism and maybe who runs the floor the best, maybe Jalen Smith, you give him a little bit more of a nod there, not taking anything away from Zac Collins. And so he fits that with what you want to do with Josh Giddey, Coby White, and really the rest of the guards in this offense. And so you love that. I think that Jalen Smith is a solid passer as well. Not great, but definitely solid. He's shown that he can rebound. And defensively, look, he's not necessarily a liability out there, but you would want to see some more. I think that when he got caught into a little bit of these switches and things like that, the activity level wasn't necessarily where you wanted it to be. You want to see some more rim protection at that size. You didn't necessarily see that. But again, he's still a player that, yes, he's played in this league, but he needs some opportunity. And so I know we don't look at him as a rookie, but he's definitely a player that needs to get some moments. And I do think that the Chicago Bulls could start him, and it's not going to be a huge drop off. I think that he would figure out a way to be productive. And I could bet on the fact of him being a player that gets you double figures. I think that I'm comfortable in saying that. And I also think that he can get you double figures in the rebound. So I think that, look, you see that he got 5.6 rebounds. I think that he could definitely up that number another 5 rebounds. I could see him being a double-double machine for the Bulls, maybe not to the standpoint of Vooch, like not to that standpoint, but I definitely think he can impact the game that way. So I wouldn't have a problem with him starting. Next, with Zac Collins, I think that Zac Collins can start for the Chicago Bulls. And let's start really with the issue with Zac Collins. And I think that the first thing that you would have to look at with him is that he has a little bit more trouble stretching the floor. So you see that his three-point shooting, it just wasn't the best, for Zac Collins. As you can see, he shot 30%, 30.4%. His best in his career, he shot 38.8%. So you want to see him a little bit more closer to that. I'm not saying that he has to come out and shoot 40% like Vooch, but in this offense to start, you want to be able to stretch the floor a little bit. But here's the thing about him. The athleticism is maybe not as good as Jalen Smith as far as running up and down the floor, but make no mistake about it, he still can. I think that he has some better hands versus Jalen Smith. So his catch radius, I think he's a lot better there. And I think that his passing is exceptional. I think that Zac Collins, if you go back, you look at those games, Zac Collins was terrific at that top of the key action in the dribble handoffs. He gave some beautiful backdoor passes to either Trey Jones or Josh Giddey, or whoever was cutting. It was beautiful. So I think that his ability to read the game and understand it, like you love that, and just being a good passer as a big. And so that's why I would feel comfortable with him starting. And one of the things that was talked about in that article that we just mentioned with Elias Schuster, he brings out the point that Zac Collins really produced as a starter for the Bulls, because in 8 starts, 14.8 points a game, 9.7 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 58.7 from the field. So that is great production. And so I know it's a small sample size, but Zac Collins is a player that certainly could be really effective for this team. Both players have some flaws, but both players could absolutely start for the Chicago Bulls. I would not have an issue if either were thrust into the starting lineup next season. And look, if we move on from Vooch, I feel comfortable with both of these players. Now, what should the Chicago Bulls do? Look, I think that the Chicago Bulls should absolutely be looking to get a center in this upcoming draft. And I think that there's a lot of different ways the Bulls can approach the center position. I think that you're looking for a center that is going to give you some versatility. I think you're going to need a center that is going to give you some physicality. And you just need a center that is going to be okay playing in this type of offense. And so, again, I'm not saying that you have to get a center that comes in and knocks down 3-point shots. All right. I'm thinking of just basically what's going on with Nikola Jokic, right? The Joker in the playoffs. And so when you look at him, and I'm not saying that the Bulls are going to get a player like that, but he doesn't need to just sit out and hit 3-point shots, right? He can dominate inside the 3-point line. He can hit you for a 3-point shot, but he can back you down. He can pass. He can hit the free throw line jumper. He's got a runner. He's got a turnaround. He's got a nice layup package. He can dunk. He can run the floor, pass, things like that. So you want a big that can give you a lot of different, just versatility for what you're looking for. And so, a guy would be a Derek Queen. I think he's another player that maybe the Chicago Bulls would be interested in getting. And I think he's a player that's been just really in a lot of mock drafts and things like that. Watched his games. Danny Wolf, like a player from Michigan, maybe he's a player that the Chicago Bulls would take a chance on. And another player, look, a lot of upside. I think he's definitely got, certainly some versatility, would be Asa Newell, right? And so these are a couple different players that maybe the Bulls could go to via the NBA draft. But I definitely think that it would be wise for the Chicago Bulls to draft a center and really start to address the front court, either a center or you need a power forward, because this team has tons of guards and we need to get a center. And right now, this is the perfect time to go get one, because you have two young centers in Zac Collins and in also two Jalen Smith, who can really be a mentor. They're not going to get in the way of what you're doing in the NBA draft, and they can also help the Chicago Bulls, win some games and just really build out this team. And so let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking here. Do you think that it should be Zac Collins that should be the starter for the Chicago Bulls? Do you feel like it can be Jalen Smith, or do you feel like Jalen Smith should be the starter for this team? Do you feel like, yes, both of these players really could start? It doesn't matter. They both don't get in the way. The bottom line is that the Chicago Bulls need to take care of business here, and they need to go out and get a very versatile center that can grow with this young core of Josh Giddey, Coby White, and hopefully Modest Vazelis as well. And so anyway, let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.